I was reading something the other day about photography.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, specifically about how a photographer decides what to put in focus. It's really interesting. You can have this gorgeous landscape, right? But if you focus on the person standing in front of the lens, the mountain just becomes background blur.
Right. It's a fundamental principle of composition. You are directing the viewer's eye. You're essentially telling them what matters most in that frame.
Exactly. And the reason I bring this up to start the show is because today we're doing a deep dive into something that, well, it feels very technical. It's grammar.
It can scare people away.
Totally.
Yeah.
But it's actually about exactly that composition. It's about directing the listener's eye using words.
I like that framing.
Oh.
I'm your resident expert for today's deep dive, and we are looking at a text titled Passive Verbs in English.
And I'm your host. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to take this concept, the passive voice, and decode it. Especially if you are a beginner learning English, this is for you. We want to unlock the secret code so you can actually use it today.
Because on the surface, passive verbs in English sounds a bit dry, I admit. But if you look at it through that lens of photography or directing a movie, it becomes fascinating. We are shifting focus. We are moving the spotlight away from the person doing the action and shining it directly on the action itself.
Right. It's not just boring verb tables. It's really about the architecture of information, and it completely changes how we view English sentences.
It really does.
Yeah.
And a lot of learners, they get taught the formula, but never the why. They end up with sentences that might be technically correct, but just feel awkward in a real conversation.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics then. The standard way we speak usually is the active voice, like John kicked the ball or the chef cooked the meal.
Right, it's linear. Actor, action, object. It's the default setting for how we experience cause and effect in the world. Someone does something, and then result happens.
But the text we're looking at today explains that English has this secondary operating system, the passive voice. This is where we flip the script completely. So instead of John kicked the ball, it becomes the ball is kicked.
And notice what happened right there. John disappeared.
He completely vanished.
Yeah, he's gone from the frame.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly the ball is the star of the show. We shifted the spotlight.
Okay, so before we get into the psychology of why we do that, we have to nail down the mechanics. How do we actually build these sentences? The source material gives us a very specific foundational formula.
Yes, the golden rule here is the verb to be plus the past participle.
Be plus past participle. It sounds simple enough, but I feel like this is where beginners really hit a wall.
Oh, absolutely. It creates a lot of friction because it directly clashes with how beginners first learn to talk about the past.
Right, because usually if you're a beginner, you learn the past simple tense first. You learn that if you want to say something happened yesterday, you just stick an ED on the end of the word. I walked, I played, I finished.
Exactly. In the past simple, that main verb is a multitasker. The word played tells you what the action is, and the ED tells you when it happened. It's doing two jobs at once.
But with this passive formula we're talking about, the main verb stops multitasking.
That is a perfect way to put it. In a passive sentence, the main verb just freezes. Let's take the verb write, for example. It turns into its past participle form, which is written, and it just stays there.
It doesn't move.
No, it is totally frozen. It doesn't matter if we're talking about yesterday or today or next year. The word is always written.
So the main verb is just chilling there. It's almost acting more like a description of the object at that point.
Precisely. It describes the state of the thing. But if that main verb is frozen, something else has to do the heavy lifting. Something has to tell the listener when this action happened.
And that is where the verb to be steps in.
Exactly. The verb to be is the engine of the sentence. It handles all the time travel. If the action happened in the past, you change to be into the past tense.
So, using the examples from the source text, you would say, the work was finished yesterday.
Right. The word was tells us it's past tense. Finished is the frozen past participle telling us the action.
Another example from the text is, the window was broken during the storm.
Again, was is the engine in the past. Broken is the frozen action.
And a third one, the book was written many years ago.
Exactly. Subject plus to be plus the past participle. Once you visualize that structure, it clicks. You have component A, the verb to be, shifting around to match the timeline, and component B, the past participle, acting as an anchor that never moves.
That stability is actually a huge relief if you think about it. If you're learning the language, you don't have to constantly memorize how to change the main verb for passive sentences. You just need to know how to conjugate to be.
It is a gift for learners.
Yeah.
But you have to break the habit of using past simple logic. A beginner might try to say, the window broke by the storm.
Which sounds like the window just decided to break itself. It has a mind of its own.
Right. Or they might say, the window was break, forgetting to change the main verb into the participle. But once you lock in be plus past participle, the whole thing makes sense.
So why do we even have this? The source material mentions something really interesting about the history here, because usually when grammar feels a bit weird or complex, there's some historical baggage attached to it.
Oh, English has so much baggage. It's a scavenger language. It borrows and steals from everywhere. The text notes that this specific structure, using be to form the passive voice, actually goes back to Old English. We're talking over 1,000 years ago.
Wow. But was it always just the verb to be?
Not entirely, and this is the fascinating evolution of it. In Old English, they had a very strict difference between a state and a process. These two different verbs. One was wasan, which eventually became was to describe a state. The other was warathon, which meant to become, to describe an active process.
Give me an example of how that worked.
So if you said the door was locked, using wasan, it meant the door is currently sitting there in a locked state. But if you used the become verb, it meant you were emphasizing the process of the door changing from open to locked, like the door becomes locked.
I see. But we don't use that second one anymore.
No, we don't. Over the centuries, as English moved through Middle English and into modern English, it simplified. We are an efficient, sometimes lazy language. We dropped that become verb entirely for this structure. We essentially decided that the verb to be could just handle both jobs.
That makes so much sense. So today, saying the door was locked can mean the action of someone locking it or just the state of finding it locked. Context tells us which one.
Exactly. The be plus past participle pattern won the evolutionary battle. It has remained incredibly stable for centuries.
I love that. It's a stable, ancient tool. So we understand the formula now, and we know where it came from. Now let's get into what I think is the hardest part for an English learner. Not the how, but the why and the when.
Yes, the practical usage.
Because grammatically, I could say, the coffee was drunk by me. But if I walked into a cafe and said that, they would look at me like I was an alien.
Or a very dramatic poet.
Right. It just sounds completely unnatural. So the source text gives us 3 specific logical criteria for when to use the passive voice, when it's not just an option, but actually the better, more natural choice.
Let's walk through them. The first criterion is use the passive voice when the action is simply more important than the doer.
Going back to our camera focus analogy.
Exactly. Think about news or science or manufacturing. The text is a classic example. These cars were made in Germany.
If we flip that to the active voice, it would be something like, factory workers made these cars in Germany.
Which is true, but it's completely irrelevant clutter. If you are buying a car, you don't care about the specific people on the assembly line. The car is the hero of the sentence. The manufacturing origin is the important detail. The specific workers are just background noise.
So forcing that into the active voice actually makes the sentence worse. It distracts the listener with characters that don't matter to the story.
Precisely. It sounds much more objective and natural to just say, these cars were made in Germany.
Okay, that brings us to reason number 2 from the text. Use the passive voice when the doer is unknown.
I call this the murder mystery function.
Like, the bank was robbed.
Right. If we don't know who robbed the bank, trying to use the active voice forces us to use a weak placeholder word. We'd have to say, someone robbed the bank.
And someone just feels so vague, it creates a weird empty space in the sentence.
It does. By using the passive, the bank was robbed, we close that empty space. We put 100% of the focus on the event itself, which is the only concrete fact we actually possess.
The bank was robbed. Sounds like a solid news headline. Someone robbed the bank. Sounds like a rumor you heard in the hallway.
That's a great distinction. The passive voice carries a tone of established fact.
Okay, reason number 3. You use the passive voice when the doer is obvious or unimportant.
This is the exact opposite of the unknown doer. Here, we know exactly who did it, but it's so incredibly obvious that saying it out loud is almost an insult to the listener's intelligence.
The example in the text is, the trash was collected.
If you say, the garbage collector collected the trash, you are being totally redundant. Who else would collect the trash?
Right, the postman isn't going to do it. So English speakers just cut the obvious information to save time and energy.
Efficiency is key. If the person doing the action is heavily implied by the action itself, like the suspect was arrested, we don't need to add by the police. We all know it was the police.
I really want to ground this for you, the listener, in some concrete, everyday situations. The souls provide some great context, but let's formulate 3 specific everyday phrases where using the passive voice makes you sound instantly more fluent and natural.
Let's do it.
Okay. Everyday phrase number 1. Imagine you walk out of a cafe and your bicycle is gone. You are talking to the police. You say, "My bike was stolen."
This is the absolute gold standard of passive voice usage for everyday life.
Why is that so much better than saying, "Someone stole my bike"?
2 reasons. First, the emotional weight. My bike is the subject now. It comes first in the sentence. You are centering your loss. Second, it emphasizes the new status of the bicycle. It has transitioned from being your bike to being a stolen bike.
It feels like a declaration of a tragedy. My bike was stolen just hits harder. It's more direct about the problem.
It really does. It invites sympathy for you, the victim, rather than focusing on this vague, unknown thief.
All right, phrase number 2. Let's say you are talking about travel or language skills. You say, English is spoken in many countries.
This perfectly illustrates the obvious doer rule we just talked about.
Because the active version is, people speak English in many countries.
And the word people adds 0 value to that sentence. It's obvious that people are the ones speaking. By stripping that away and saying English is spoken, you elevate the statement. It makes it about the global reach of the language itself.
It sounds incredibly clean and objective. People speak English, sounds a bit conversational, maybe even juvenile. But English is spoken sounds professional.
Exactly. It sounds like an established fact.
Okay, phrase number 3. This one is highly practical for the workplace. You're in a meeting, there was a major glitch in the software, and your team fixed it. You report to your boss, the problem was solved quickly.
Ah, yes, the corporate passive. It is a survival tool in business.
Why do we love this one so much in offices?
Well, it's very nuanced. You could say, I solved the problem quickly.
But that can sound arrogant, right? Like you're bragging to the room.
It definitely can, depending on the culture. I solved it. Puts all the spotlight on you. The problem was solved. Puts the spotlight entirely on the result. It's team-oriented. It sends the message. The issue is gone. The result is good. Let's move forward.
It also works brilliantly if you didn't solve it personally, but your department did. It spreads the credit.
And think about the reverse. What if the problem wasn't solved? If you say, Steve didn't solve the problem, you are personally attacking Steve in a meeting.
Oh, Steve.
But if you say the problem was not solved, you are attacking the situation instead of the person. You remain objective. It's a great way to keep the peace.
That is a massive pro tip for anyone working in an English-speaking office. Use the passive voice to depersonalize conflicts.
It is incredibly useful.
This actually leads us perfectly into the final section of our source material today. It touches on a myth that a lot of learners encounter. I know many listeners have probably had a teacher tell them at some point, don't use the passive voice. It's bad writing. It's weak.
Yes, that is a very common piece of advice, especially in writing classes. Famous style guides have basically waged war on the passive voice, arguing that it lacks energy and makes sentences too wordy.
And to be fair, the ball was kicked by John. It's definitely clunkier than John kicked the ball.
It is. If you're writing a fast-paced fiction book or describing an action sequence, you absolutely want the active voice. You want the energy of the doer. But the source material for this deep dive makes it clear that this advice has been heavily misinterpreted over the years.
The rule isn't never use it. The rule is don't abuse it.
Exactly. The text explicitly calls the passive voice an essential part of English. If you try to speak English using only the active voice, you're going to sound completely unnatural. You'll sound like you're reading from a children's book. I did this, then he did that, then she saw this. It becomes exhausting to listen to.
The passive voice provides rhythm. It gives you variety in how you structure your thoughts.
And crucially, it allows you to maintain what linguists call topic continuity.
What does that mean in practice?
It means if we are telling a story about the Mona Lisa, we want the Mona Lisa to remain the subject of all our sentences. We want to say, the Mona Lisa was painted by Da Vinci. It was stolen in 1911. It was recovered 2 years later.
Oh, I see. If we forced all of that into the active voice, we'd have to keep changing the subject. Da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. A thief stole it in 1911. Police recovered it.
Exactly. It gets very choppy. The camera is whipping wildly back and forth between Da Vinci, the thief, the police. But using the passive voice keeps the camera beautifully steady on the painting itself.
So it's really about the flow of information. It organizes things logically for the listener.
It gives you flexibility. And that is the biggest takeaway for you as a learner. Don't look at this as just a frustrating grammar rule to memorize. Look at it as a tool for controlling how people process the information you give them.
I want to wrap up our deep dive with a thought that struck me while reading through the sources today. We've talked a lot about how the passive voice is objective and professional, but there's a slightly darker side to it too, isn't there?
There definitely is. We hinted at it with the office example, using it to avoid direct blame.
Right. And I think the ultimate, most famous example of this is the political catchphrase, mistakes were made.
Oh, yes. That is an absolute masterclass in using the passive voice strategically.
It follows our formula perfectly. Be in the past tense, which is were, plus the past participle made, mistakes were made. But the brilliant or maybe sneaky part is who made them.
The sentence absolutely refuses to tell you. It acknowledges that a bad event occurred, the mistakes, but it completely erases the person responsible from the narrative. It's dressed up to sound like an apology, but it functions entirely as a shield.
It's technically a true statement. The mistakes did exist, but it avoids all personal accountability.
This is exactly why critical thinking is so vital when you are consuming media. When you listen to the news or read a history book and you see headlines like protesters were injured or bombs were dropped, you have to pause and ask yourself, by whom? Why did the writer actively choose to hide the doer in this sentence?
Are they just being efficient because the doer's obvious, or are they being evasive?
Is it the camera focus trick we talked about earlier? Are they genuinely trying to center the victims, or are they subtly trying to protect the perpetrators by keeping them out of the spotlight?
That thought right there is what makes this a real deep dive. Grammar isn't just about passing a language test. It's the literal architecture of how we construct reality and assign responsibility.
So for everyone listening today, do not be afraid of this power. The passive voice is a remarkable tool. Use it to emphasize your results at work. Use it to sound professional and objective. Just be very aware of what you are choosing to highlight and what you are choosing to hide.
All right, let's do a quick recap of our mission today before we go. The secret code, the formula you need is be plus past participle.
The verb to be is your engine. It tells the time. The past participle is your anchor. It tells the action.
Use this structure when the result matters more than the person. Use it when you don't know who the person is. Or use it when the person is obvious.
And remember your 3 everyday...
Keep those 3 phrases in your back pocket and you'll be well on your way.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive was finished.
The script was written.
And hopefully the concept was understood.
Very nicely done.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Take this new tool out into the world and practice it. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you next time.